He told her not to come, said she'd embarrass him in front of everyone. That Christmas night, she stayed silent. But her silence was only the beginning, because when she finally walked through those doors, every face in that room changed. His pride, his lies, his entire world shattered in seconds, and what she brought with her that night, no one saw coming. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories, where pain turns to power and love always finds its way through the storm. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments, because this story will leave your heart racing till the very last second. So sit back, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into Don't Come, You'll Embarrass Us. A story of betrayal, strength, and the sweetest revenge love could ever write. Luna stood by the frost-kissed window, her dark curls falling softly across her cheeks as she watched the snow swirl in chaotic patterns outside, each flake reflecting the muted glow of streetlights and carrying a cold reminder of the isolation she felt in her own home. Her heart thumped painfully, a mix of hope and fear battling within her chest, for tonight was Christmas Eve, a night she had imagined for months, dreaming of warmth, laughter, and the soft embrace of belonging beside her husband's family. Yet the moment she had feared was always possible now loomed over her like an icy shadow. She remembered how she had spent hours picking out the perfect gifts, each one a small testament to her love, her careful consideration of every taste, every whispered comment Constance's mother had made over the years, imagining the joy on their faces, picturing herself finally being included, finally being seen, not as a guest, not as someone beneath notice, but as part of a family she had always tried so desperately to be worthy of. But then the words came, sharp as shattered glass, slicing through her chest, spoken by the man whose heart she had once believed was aligned with hers, the man she had built her world around. Don't come, you'll embarrass us. She had felt her stomach drop, her knees threatening to buckle, her body freezing in place, as if the warmth of the room had fled in terror, leaving only a chill that seeped into her bones. She had smiled, a faint trembling curve of lips meant to hide the tempest behind her eyes, tears gathering and threatening to spill over the delicate line of her lashes, but she refused to allow him the satisfaction of seeing her break, so she turned her gaze back to the snow, pretending composure, pretending the words had no weight, though each syllable hammered against her heart, echoing long after he had left. She had watched the polished black car gleam against the icy driveway, Consta stepping inside with that arrogant, unseeing gaze, his tie perfectly aligned, his pride polished and untouchable, leaving her in a silence so deafening it roared inside her ears, the engine's purr, a mocking melody of the life she thought she shared, but that had never truly existed for her. Alone, she moved mechanically, unwrapping the ribbon once more, adjusting the gifts she had meticulously labeled for his mother, his father, his sister, and brother, her hands shaking not from the cold, but from the sting of exclusion, the bitter taste of rejection settling like frost in her throat. Each bow she straightened, each tag she smoothed, was a painful reminder that all her efforts, all her sacrifices to build a home, a dream, and a life for him had been invisible, unappreciated, discarded with a single cruel sentence. She glanced at her reflection in the window, a ghostly image behind the frosted glass, and her heart clenched at the woman staring back at her, a woman who had given up her voice, her ambitions, her own joy, to stand silently behind a man who never noticed, a woman who had faded into shadows while he thrived in the light, confident and unchallenged, blind to the beauty, intelligence and love she had poured into the life they shared. That evening, she prepared a simple dinner for one, the aroma of roasted vegetables and spiced bread filling the small apartment with a hollow warmth. Each sizzle and pop a reminder of the empty chair at the table, of the laughter she would never hear, of the voice that would not call her name with endearment, and as she lit a single candle, its soft, flickering glow casting trembling shadows across the walls, she whispered a quiet prayer, a plea to not feel forgotten, To survive the ache of being invisible in her own life, to find strength she was unsure she still possessed. Outside, the laughter from neighboring homes filtered through the frosted panes, warm and jubilant, each sound a sting, each shout and cheer a dagger twisting into her solitude, amplifying the silence of her own apartment into something that felt endless and echoing, a void where her belonging should have been, a void she could not fill no matter how tightly she wrapped her scarf around herself or how loudly she told her reflection to be strong. She took a tentative step away from the window, only to pause mid-step as her phone buzzed sharply, a sudden intrusion into the quiet grief she had been wrapping around herself like a fragile cocoon. The screen flashed an unknown number, a stark contrast to the evening's dim warmth, and she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button, mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a wrong number, a prank, someone reminding her of all the ways she was alone? Her pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and dread knitting together a tight knot in her chest. When she finally answered, her voice trembled despite her best effort to sound calm. "Hello?" And a deep, smooth voice responded, carrying a timbre that seemed to resonate with authority, confidence, and an almost imperceptible kindness. "Mrs. Constance, this is Mr. Hazelwood. May I have a moment of your time?" Luna's hand froze mid-air, her breath catching in her throat, her heart skipping a beat as if it had recognized a distant yet powerful rhythm, something she had long thought lost. Hope. The name alone struck her like a lightning bolt, reverberating through every fiber of her being, her mind spinning as she struggled to process the reality of it, the disbelief clinging stubbornly despite the clarity of the voice on the other end. Mr. Hazelwood, the billionaire CEO who oversaw her husband's company, the man whose presence had always loomed distant and untouchable, was speaking directly to her, asking for her time, her attention, as though her existence and her thoughts mattered, and the surreal weight of that moment sent shivers racing down her spine. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the phone tighter, almost afraid to respond, almost afraid that saying yes would shatter some invisible rule of the world she had been forced to inhabit, a world where she was secondary, where her desires were irrelevant, where her worth had always been measured against the pride and approval of Constance and his family. Yet something in his tone, the warmth threading beneath the professionalism, invited her cautiously forward like the faint light of dawn cutting through a long, cold night. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Luna felt a flutter of anticipation, a flicker of courage, and a whispered question she dared not say aloud. Could this be the moment her life began to shift? The moment she reclaimed the self she had buried beneath kindness and duty? She swallowed hard, the sound of her own heartbeat filling her ears as she whispered, "Yes, of course, Mr. Hazelwood," barely believing the words she had spoken aloud, yet feeling them solidify her resolve. The line was quiet for a heartbeat before he spoke again, calm, measured, and yet carrying a thread of intrigue. "I'd like to meet you tomorrow morning at a place where we can speak freely. I think you'll find this worthwhile." Luna nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see her, the strange thrill of possibility coursing through her veins, an electric current that made her pulse race, and just as she was about to hang up, the phone buzzed again. A text this time, a simple line. "Dress comfortably. Wear your confidence." Luna's eyes widened at the unusual insistence, the way he seemed to know her insecurities and yet encouraged her to step beyond them, and she felt a shiver of both fear and curiosity, a sense that the next day might unravel everything she had believed about her life and the man who had dismissed her as unworthy. Her gaze drifted to the wrapped gifts on the counter, the labels still intact, mocking reminders of the family who had rejected her, and she felt a quiet, almost imperceptible smile tug at her lips, the faintest spark of rebellion and self-worth igniting within her. For the first time in a long while, Luna allowed herself to imagine a possibility beyond the isolation, beyond the silent tears, beyond the life she had been forced to accept. The possibility that someone saw her, really saw her, and valued her beyond her association with a man who had belittled her. Yet even in that fragile hope, a flicker of doubt remained, a shadow whispering cautions in the back of her mind, questioning the reality of this sudden attention, warning her that nothing was ever truly simple, that expectations carried the risk of disappointment, that power and kindness often hid agendas she could not yet see. Luna exhaled slowly, letting the phone rest gently against her ear as the snow continued to fall outside, the delicate flakes catching the light and sparkling like diamonds against the darkness. And she felt the strange mix of fear and anticipation curling within her, a coiled tension that demanded release. She did not yet know what Hazelwood wanted, nor why he had chosen her, nor what ripple this small connection might create. But she sensed, with an instinctual certainty that made her pulse tighten, that something monumental had begun with this call, a shift in her world that would challenge everything she had endured. Her mind raced through the possibilities, imagining conversations that had yet to occur, doors that might open, and futures that could finally include her desires, her voice, her dreams. Yet, just as she began to feel a glimmer of courage, the phone line clicked softly, and for an instant the room seemed to hold its breath with her, the silence amplifying the ache of loneliness that still clung stubbornly to her shoulders. Her fingers lingered on the phone, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what had just happened, and she whispered into the empty room, "This could change everything." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in soft white, carrying with it the promise of beginnings, and the quiet hint of secrets yet to be revealed, and Luna, alone yet strangely unafraid, clutched the phone to her chest, feeling the first stirrings of a new chapter about to unfold, one that could shift her life from the shadows into the light. Her heart raced, her breath caught, and a thrill she had not felt in years coursed through her as she glanced at the gifts, the empty chair, the silent walls of her apartment, and the unknown future looming ahead. Luna froze, her eyes wide, her heart pounding, the reality sinking in. Her husband's billionaire CEO was calling her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Luna woke to a pale winter light slipping through her curtains, her body still humming with the residual shock of the previous night's phone call, the words of Mr. Hazelwood lingering in her mind like an echo she could not shake, the memory of his calm, measured voice, and the subtle warmth threading through it, igniting a flutter of anticipation she had not felt in years. She dressed carefully, selecting a soft cream blouse paired with a pencil skirt, aiming for quiet elegance, the kind of understated confidence she had long forgotten she possessed. Each movement deliberate, purposeful, a silent declaration that today, for the first time in too long, she was stepping forward for herself and no one else. Her stomach twisted with a nervous excitement as she approached the quiet cafe Hazelwood had suggested, its small size and tucked-away location offering both comfort and privacy, a stark contrast to the grand, intimidating spaces she had long associated with the world of wealth and power. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, and her eyes immediately found him, tall, impeccably dressed, with a presence that seemed to command the room without arrogance, his gaze locking onto hers as if he had been expecting her all along, and a faint, approving smile lifted the corners of his mouth, warming her in a way that no words could yet capture. She felt her hands tremble slightly, not from the cold, but from the strange, unfamiliar mixture of anxiety and excitement that danced along her nerves, and she realized that even now she had been so long invisible, so long overlooked, that the attention of a man like Hazelwood stirred emotions she had carefully tucked away to survive her marriage. As she approached the table, he rose gracefully, extending his hand in greeting, his eyes meeting hers with a clarity that made her heart skip a beat. And in that simple gesture, Luna felt both recognition and respect, as though she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in a lifetime. "Mrs. Constance," he said gently, his tone formal, yet imbued with a warmth that immediately eased the tension coiling in her shoulders. "Thank you for meeting me this morning. I hope I'm not intruding." Luna shook his hand, her pulse racing, a mixture of caution and curiosity lacing her every movement, and she managed a quiet, "No, it's no trouble at all." He gestured to the seat across from him, and as they settled, the soft hum of the cafe faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in a space that seemed suspended, delicate and intimate, as if the world had narrowed to this single, pivotal moment. Hazelwood leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed yet commanding, and spoke with a clarity and purpose that immediately drew her in. "I've been following the work you've done at the community shelter. Your dedication, your ability to connect with people, to inspire change quietly but powerfully. It's remarkable. It's not often that someone of your caliber, your empathy, meets someone like me." Luna blinked, unsure whether to feel flattered or stunned, her mind racing at the implication that someone of such influence had noticed her, had taken the time to recognize her efforts, her struggles, her life that had been mostly invisible to the people she had once hoped would value her. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice almost caught in her throat, the weight of disbelief mingling with a cautious hope. And Hazelwood's eyes softened, encouraging her gently, patiently, as though her hesitation was a natural response to long years of being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. "Say nothing for now," he replied smoothly, a faint smile playing at the edges of his lips. "Just listen. I have an initiative starting soon, a program designed to empower women from all walks of life, to help them discover their voice, their potential, and I want you to be a part of it. Your insight, your kindness, your intelligence, it's exactly the influence I need." Luna's chest tightened, her thoughts spinning, her mind struggling to reconcile the enormity of the opportunity with the quiet voice inside her that had long been silenced by Constance's constant belittlement. She took a tentative breath, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling her senses as she leaned forward slightly, eager to understand more, but wary, cautious, as though one wrong move could shatter this fragile possibility into dust. Why me?" she finally whispered, the words barely audible, a blend of disbelief and tentative hope. Hazelwood's gaze held hers unwaveringly, his voice soft yet compelling, "Because I see what others ignore. I see your heart, Luna. I see the woman who has given everything to the wrong people, and I want to help you claim the life you deserve." The words struck her in a way she had not anticipated. The tenderness, the respect, the recognition of her struggles ignited a spark she had almost forgotten existed, a sense of worth, of being seen as someone valuable, not a shadow behind her husband, not someone to be quietly tolerated, but a woman of substance and brilliance. She listened as he outlined his vision, the projects, the lives that could be touched, the potential she could help unlock. And with each sentence, each carefully chosen word, her heart swelled, her chest warmed, and a faint smile, hesitant but genuine, tugged at her lips, a smile she had not worn for herself in far too long. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing naturally, a mixture of ideas, laughter, shared experiences, and gentle teasing, each moment eroding the invisible walls Luna had built around herself, each sentence building her courage, her confidence, her sense of self once more. As the cafe's shadows lengthened and the sunlight shifted through the windows, she felt lighter, freer, reborn in a way she hadn't dared to imagine. Her steps lighter, her voice carrying strength she had thought lost, her eyes glimmering with a quiet determination. And yet, just as she gathered her belongings, preparing to step back into the world that had never valued her, the bell above the cafe door rang, a sound that made her blood run cold and her breath catch in her throat. She turned slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. and froze. There, framed by the doorway, stood Constance, his polished shoes glinting on the tile, his coat dusted with snow, and his mother, her expression twisted with shock and barely concealed fury, her eyes narrowing into slits as they both stared at her, the recognition dawning in horror across their faces. Luna's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of fear, defiance, and disbelief washing over her in a tidal wave of emotions, and she felt the air tighten around her as if the cafe itself had noticed the tension, the space compressing into an invisible trap, one she had not expected. "Luna!" his mother hissed, her voice trembling, sharp and dangerous, a serpentine whisper that cut through the hum of conversation, drawing the attention of a few nearby patrons who pretended not to notice, but could not escape the electric tension radiating from the trio. Luna's smile, so carefully crafted, faltered for a heartbeat, the sense of safety and liberation. She had begun to feel threatened by the shadow of their sudden intrusion, and she realized in a chilling instant that this meeting, this moment she had cherished, had already begun a storm she could not yet predict. Her hands clenched the edge of her chair, her mind racing with possibilities, questions piling atop one another, fear and excitement entwined in a dance she could not yet control, and she felt an instinctual surge of courage rise from somewhere deep within her, a spark fueled by the months of humiliation, silence, and dismissal she had endured. Hazelwood, seated across from her, noticed her hesitation, his hand subtly brushing hers, a grounding touch that reminded her she was not alone, that she had allies in a world that had always sought to minimize her, and that whatever storm awaited, she was no longer powerless, no longer silent, no longer invisible. The tension crackled in the air, the distant clatter of cups and murmurs of other patrons forming a backdrop to the charged confrontation, and Luna felt a thrill of anticipation, the strange, heady realization that her life might pivot entirely on this unexpected collision, that the presence of Constance and his mother here was not just intrusion, it was revelation, exposure, the first real challenge to her reclaimed confidence. She straightened, drawing her shoulders back, lifting her chin, and met their gaze with a calm that belied the hurricane inside her, a quiet strength that had been forged in months of solitude, work, and introspection, a strength that spoke more loudly than any words she could utter in that charged moment. And then, just as her lips parted to respond, Hazelwood's eyes locked on hers with that unmistakable warmth and assurance, a subtle cue that whatever happened next, she would not face it alone, a silent promise that this meeting, this confrontation, could be the very moment where the scales of her life began to tip irrevocably toward her own freedom and power. Luna's smile faded, replaced by the cool, measured calm of a woman who knew storms were coming. But for the first time, she realized she was ready to face them, and this secret meeting had only just begun to unravel the world she had once thought contained. The night air was thick with tension as Luna entered her apartment, her body still trembling from the confrontation at the cafe, the lingering image of Constance and his mother frozen in shock etched into her mind, their disbelief and outrage now a haunting echo she could not escape, and before she could even set down her bag, the familiar tone of his voice sliced through the room, sharp and accusing, his words jagged and cruel. "How dare you humiliate me in front of my boss, Luna?" The accusation hit her chest with the force of a hammer, each word reverberating like shards of glass across her heartbeat, and for a moment she wondered if she should speak, defend herself, explain that she had done nothing wrong. But she remained still, letting the silence stretch, a shield against the tidal wave of anger he had unleashed. Constance's eyes were wild, veins standing out against his temples, his jaw tight, the voice he had once used to command respect, now trembling with fury, each syllable a desperate attempt to assert control over a situation he could no longer dominate. Luna's silence, deliberate and calm, fueled the storm further, the fury radiating off him as he gestured wildly, pacing the small space of the living room like a caged animal. And yet, deep inside her, something had shifted. something fundamental and irreversible. She realized with a quiet but fierce clarity that she would no longer shrink to accommodate his comfort, would no longer hide herself to soothe his pride, would no longer allow the years of invisibility to define her worth. After hours of his shouting, when the echoes of his rage finally faded into exhausted silence, Luna sat in the muted glow of the living room lamp, her chest heaving, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, as though the storm he had brought into the room had cleared a path within her, leaving a space where courage and self-belief could finally take root. Days later, the soft chime of her phone startled her, and she saw the name she had come to both anticipate and revere, Mr. Hazelwood. Her fingers hovered over the screen, heart hammering, pulse quickened, and when she finally answered, his voice, calm and confident yet gentle, rolled over her ears like a balm to her frayed nerves. "Luna, I wanted to speak with you again. I have an opportunity I believe you are ready for." She listened, each word like sunlight piercing a long, cold winter, his recognition of her insight, intelligence, and dedication a stark contrast to the contempt she had endured at home. And yet, the familiar knot of fear tightened in her stomach at the thought of Constance, his pride, his rage should he ever discover her taking steps outside the narrow confines of his world. An official position at the foundation, Hazelwood continued, outlining responsibilities, goals, and vision with an elegance and clarity that made Luna's heart flutter with both excitement and nervousness, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension she had not felt in years. He spoke not only of the work, but of the trust he placed in her, of the value she would bring, the lives she could touch, and the confidence that he would support her every step of the way. A contrast so stark to the dismissive, belittling gaze she had endured for so long that she felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes. She hesitated, torn between the desire to finally step into a world where she mattered and the fear of Constance's wrath, the memory of his shouted words still echoing in her ears, yet beneath the fear was a whisper, quiet but persistent. "This is your chance to rise, Luna. Your time is now." With a careful breath, she accepted quietly, a decision made in the sanctuary of her own strength, and as she hung up the phone, a new surge of purpose coursed through her veins, the pulse of possibility beating in her chest. The days that followed were a delicate dance of secrecy and preparation, Luna navigating her dual worlds with a grace born of necessity, while Constance continued to brag to anyone who would listen about how well he controlled his wife, utterly unaware that the woman he claimed to dominate was quietly charting a path of independence, resilience, and power. Hazelwood became more than a mentor during those days. He was a patient guide, a listener who understood her fears and ambitions alike, a quiet protector who never overstepped, but whose presence provided a sense of security she had never known. Their meetings were punctuated with moments of warmth and subtle connection, his voice low and steady as he offered guidance, his gaze lingering on her in ways that hinted at unspoken understanding and admiration. The subtlest brush of hands across papers or chairs, sending shivers along her spine without the need for words. Late nights at the Foundation's office became a space where laughter was shared, ideas flowed freely, and the distance between their worlds melted slightly with every thoughtful glance, every encouraging nod, every carefully chosen word that seemed to build invisible bridges between them. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights glittered through the windows like scattered stars, Hazelwood leaned forward slightly, his voice a whisper, yet resonant with sincerity. "You deserve a life where you're not hidden, Luna. A life where your brilliance isn't overshadowed, where your kindness is seen, and your heart is valued." The honesty in his tone made her chest tighten, a flutter of emotion she had buried long ago, a dangerous yet exhilarating sensation that left her breathless and warm. her heart dancing in rhythms she thought she had forgotten. She felt a mix of exhilaration, fear, and the sweet thrill of being recognized as herself, not as someone's shadow, not as someone to be controlled, but as a woman with her own voice, her own power, and her own choices. Every glance they exchanged in those late nights carried weight, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond forming between them, a connection that was as professional as it was quietly magnetic, and Luna began to recognize a sense of anticipation in herself, a growing certainty that her life was moving into a direction that Constance could never predict, a path paved with both opportunity and a newfound dignity. And yet, the comfort and empowerment she felt was tempered by the ever-present awareness of Constance's looming threat, the unpredictability of his temper, the fragile illusion of control he believed he wielded, and the knowledge that any slip, any discovery, could ignite a storm. The nights were long, the days a careful choreography, and Luna's mind constantly balanced between cautious excitement and latent fear, the duality sharpening her focus and resolve, honing her sense of self, and each day brought subtle triumphs that whispered of a life reclaimed, a voice found, and a power once denied finally being claimed. But no victory is without risk, and the tension in her chest never fully dissipated, the sense of imminent confrontation, a constant, pulsing reminder that she was not entirely free, that her new life existed in delicate secrecy. Then, one evening, as she returned from the office with the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent and a sense of purpose blooming in her chest, the door to her apartment swung open before she could even reach the handle, and there he was, Constance, standing in the hallway, his expression twisted, his eyes wide with disbelief, his hand holding her phone, the screen glowing ominously with Hazelwood's name blinking insistently. The sight of him froze her mid-step, a chill running through her spine, a cocktail of fear, anger, and defiance coursing through her veins. And in that frozen heartbeat, she understood that her life, her choices, her growing independence had just collided with the man who had always sought to suppress them. Luna's chest tightened, her eyes narrowing, and for the first time, she met Constance's glare with quiet, unwavering strength, knowing that whatever storm was coming next, she would face it on her own terms, and nothing would ever make her retreat again. 4. The moment Luna closed the door behind her after that tense encounter with Constance, the weight she had carried for years seemed to both press upon her chest and release in one strange paradox, the quiet hum of the city outside, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside her, and she realized she could no longer remain in a home where her presence was tolerated at best and despised at worst. She needed space to breathe, to exist, to reclaim herself without the shadow of his anger constantly looming over her. And so she found herself walking the dimly lit streets that night, searching, hoping, and finally discovering a modest apartment, small yet warm, with sunlight pouring through its windows in the morning like a promise of beginnings. Her first nights alone were both liberating and lonely. The silence of her new space ringing in her ears like both freedom and challenge, and she found herself pacing, unpacking, arranging the small comforts of a life she was slowly beginning to claim for herself. Her thoughts a mix of excitement, fear, and determination, each action a declaration that she was no longer the woman who had bent and folded herself into someone else's definition of worth. Under Hazelwood's guidance, the transformation began quietly at first, subtle yet profound. He encouraged her to speak, to assert her ideas, to present her insights, not as suggestions to be dismissed, but as valuable contributions that demanded acknowledgement, and each small victory, each nod of approval, each smile of recognition, built the scaffolding of confidence around her previously hidden brilliance, Luna's natural grace, which had always been present but suppressed under Constance's control, evolved into an undeniable elegance, the poise in her walk, the clarity in her speech, the calm authority in her decisions, signaling a woman who had rediscovered herself, and she felt the power of her voice, once silent, now heard and respected, a balm to the wounds years of dismissal had inflicted. She began attending more meetings with Hazelwood, initially as an observer, then gradually as a participant, her opinions shaping discussions, her ideas turning into projects, and the people around her began to notice, their eyes lifting to meet hers with respect rather than dismissal. And soon, her name started appearing alongside Hazelwood's in business magazines, her impact on the community growing in recognition and influence, a visible proof that she was no longer invisible, that she had a place in the world beyond the shadow of her husband. Each project she undertook became a testament to her dedication and vision, whether it was initiating programs for women in need, organizing educational opportunities for underprivileged children, or launching initiatives that reshaped neighborhoods, and with each success, her confidence deepened, a quiet glow building in her heart that no insult or belittlement could ever extinguish. And as her professional life flourished, so too did the bond between her and Hazelwood. Their conversations evolved from mentor-student exchanges to moments of genuine connection, the subtle warmth of shared laughter, the comfort of knowing someone believed in her wholly, and the fleeting, lingering glances that spoke volumes yet said nothing at all, each one a brush of emotion that left her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and cautious hope. One evening, after a charity gala where her efforts had been publicly praised, Hazelwood offered his arm as they walked under the soft fall of snow, the city around them muted by winter's quiet, the lights reflecting in delicate sparkles against the icy streets, and he whispered softly, low enough that only she could hear, "You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." Luna felt her cheeks flush, a rush of warmth flooding through her as her heart trembled, emotions she thought she had long buried, hope, joy, admiration, even a tentative stir of love, rising within her, filling her chest with a delicate ache she had not realized she had been starving for. She walked beside him, feeling the gentle brush of his hand near hers, the subtle weight of his presence anchoring her. And yet there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, the thrill of something unspoken, a promise hovering between them, electrifying, impossible to ignore. And Luna could not help but wonder how far this bond could go, what this connection might mean for a life she was only beginning to claim as her own. Back home that night, alone in the soft glow of her apartment, she looked into the mirror and saw not the timid, silenced woman she had once been, but a figure of poise, strength, and beauty, her brown skin radiant under the light, her eyes sparkling with the quiet fire of determination, her posture unyielding yet elegant, a reflection of someone who had endured storms and emerged not broken, but reborn, a woman who had finally reclaimed the narrative of her life. Even as the city slept, Luna's mind replayed the events of the night, the admiration in Hazelwood's eyes, the subtle but undeniable chemistry, the intoxicating sense of being truly seen and appreciated, and she felt a shiver of excitement mixed with a whisper of fear, because power, respect, and recognition came with risks, and her past, with Constance waiting, could still reach her if she faltered. She sank into her armchair, wrapping herself in a soft blanket, and allowed herself a small, private smile, a release of the tension she had carried for months, while simultaneously plotting and anticipating the next steps of this journey, the next opportunities that would allow her to grow even further, and each thought, each plan, each possibility sent ripples of hope through her, warming her from the inside out. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, her phone buzzed quietly on the table beside her, a single line lighting up the screen in Hazelwood's familiar font. "Next Christmas, you won't stand alone. Luna's eyes widened, a shiver of curiosity, excitement, and subtle apprehension coursing through her, the words carrying the weight of unspoken promises, hints of closeness yet to be explored, and the intoxicating suggestion that the coming year might bring changes she had only dared dream of in her quietest moments. The room seemed to hum with possibility, the soft sound of winter wind brushing against her windows like a whisper of fate, and she felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of anticipation and thrill wrapping around her like the blanket she clutched to her chest, for she realized in that quiet, solitary moment that her life had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer the woman defined by fear, by silencing, by humiliation. She was a force in motion, ready to embrace the opportunities, challenges, and perhaps even love that awaited her. Luna's fingers hovered over her phone as she stared at Hazelwood's message, a sense of excitement and unknown danger intertwining, her mind racing with possibilities, knowing that the next steps she took would define her future, and that even the shadows of her past could no longer hold her back. The year had passed with quiet intensity, a series of unseen victories and silent triumphs that had transformed Luna in ways she could scarcely have imagined. And yet, as the snow fell gently outside the grand windows of Constance's family mansion, she knew that her life was about to collide once more with the man who had once dismissed her, mocked her, and underestimated her completely. Constance strutted through the marble halls of his family home, shoulders squared, voice echoing with pride as he recounted his proximity to Hazelwood, his every boast dripping with the arrogance of a man who still believed he controlled the world, unaware that the very woman he had discarded was now the right hand of the CEO he claimed to know, his mother, polishing the silverware with a satisfied smile, glanced at him occasionally, pride in her eyes, her thoughts steeped in the illusion that everything was proceeding according to her carefully constructed plan, blissfully ignorant of the storm that was quietly gathering beyond the walls of their mansion, a storm that carried elegance, confidence, and power in the form of the woman they had both tried to suppress. Meanwhile, miles away, Luna prepared for an evening that promised both beauty and revelation, her pulse quickening as she read Hazelwood's message inviting her personally to the company's grand Christmas gala, not merely as a guest, but as his guest of honor, a recognition that thrilled her yet frightened her in equal measure, the thought of facing Constance and his family filling her with a delicate tension she had long avoided. She tried to decline at first, her hand hovering over the phone as the familiar knot of hesitation crept into her chest. But Hazelwood's calm, unwavering gaze met hers when they spoke, his tone quiet but insistent. "This is your stage, Luna. This is the moment where you reclaim your story. Trust yourself." His words wrapped around her like a shield, steadying her racing heartbeat, and she realized that he was not only inviting her to the gala, but also preparing her to step into her own power, to face a past that had tried to define her and emerge stronger, unbroken, radiant. Hours later, Luna stood before her mirror, the soft glow of her apartment's lighting, reflecting off the shimmering silver gown she had chosen, the fabric hugging her form with a gentle elegance, its sparkle catching the light with every subtle movement. And she felt a rush of self-awareness, a surge of pride and anticipation that made her chest tighten and her breath catch, as though the gown itself had become a symbol of the woman she had become. Soft yet unyielding, radiant yet calm, beautiful yet untouchable in her confidence. Hazelwood arrived at the door, the sound of his footsteps grounding her as his gaze lingered on her, admiration and warmth radiating in a way that left her heart fluttering. And when he offered his arm, she accepted without hesitation, the subtle brush of his hand against hers, igniting a spark that made her pulse race, the connection between them charged with both the electricity of attraction and the deep resonance of mutual respect and understanding. The drive to the gala was quiet, the city lights streaming past the limousine windows like liquid gold, reflecting off the silver of her gown, each passing moment heightening her awareness of the night to come, the confrontation she had longed for and dreaded, and the intoxicating knowledge that this evening was a turning point, a chapter closing on humiliation and opening on recognition, power, and perhaps even a hint of love she was only beginning to admit to herself. As they approached the grand ballroom, Luna's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing with anticipation and a flicker of nerves, the weight of her transformation and the significance of her presence at the gala settling like a mantle of authority over her shoulders, the silver fabric of her gown shimmering like a shield as she stepped from the limousine, her head held high, eyes glimmering with determination and quiet defiance. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, polished and imposing, and Hazelwood turned to her, his voice low, intimate, carrying the weight of a promise and the thrill of the unknown. "Ready to end the chapter that broke you?" The words sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of excitement, courage, and apprehension mingling in her veins, and she felt the gravity of the moment, knowing that once she crossed that threshold, nothing would ever be the same, that every eye would inevitably turn to measure the woman she had become, and that Constance, standing somewhere in the crowd or nearby, would witness the truth of her rise. The doors opened, revealing a scene of opulence and celebration, chandeliers casting a golden glow over elegantly dressed guests, the soft hum of conversation punctuated by laughter and clinking glasses. Yet all Luna could feel was the magnetic pull of destiny, the awareness that every step she took into that space carried power, elegance, and unspoken defiance, her presence a silent statement that she was no longer to be underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. She felt Hazelwood's steady hand on her back as they entered, a grounding force amidst the swirling sea of eyes, the subtle but undeniable warmth of his presence reassuring her that she was not alone, that she had an ally, a protector, and perhaps more, as whispers began to ripple through the crowd, the hum of curiosity and recognition brushing against her like a breeze, drawing her into the center of attention without effort or artifice. Eyes turned, some with admiration, some with envy, some with the faintest glimmer of recognition. And for the first time in years, Luna felt the intoxicating sensation of being seen, not as someone's shadow, not as an accessory to another's life, but as a force in her own right. The culmination of months of perseverance, courage, and quiet brilliance, finally acknowledged in the most public of stages. Hazelwood's eyes met hers again, lingering with a gaze that needed no words, filled with pride, protection, and a subtle but undeniable affection. And as he led her further into the gala, Luna's breath caught, the sensation of triumph and anticipation swirling through her chest, a delicate mixture of elation and nervousness that made every step feel both monumental and exhilarating. Each guest they passed turned, whispers trailing in their wake, some faces breaking into astonished smiles, others hardening with envy or disbelief. Yet Luna's own smile remained calm, poised and radiant, a beacon of the transformation she had achieved, the quiet storm of resilience and beauty she now embodied, and she felt a sense of satisfaction deeper than any she had experienced in years, the knowledge that her presence alone shifted the dynamics of the room, the glittering decorations, the soft music, the murmur of voices, all blended into a backdrop as Luna walked, every subtle movement of her gown, every delicate lift of her chin, every controlled breath speaking volumes about the woman she had become, the power she now held, and the inevitable reckoning that awaited those who had once sought to diminish her. And just as the first round of applause began for another speaker, Hazelwood leaned closer, his voice a whisper that only she could hear, carrying both reassurance and challenge. "Tonight, Luna, is yours. Every glance, every word, every moment. Claim it. Show them who you are." Luna felt her pulse spike, a mixture of nerves and exhilaration, her heart racing with the anticipation of the confrontation, the recognition, the subtle thrill of victory yet to be fully realized. And she knew with an unshakable certainty that this night would be remembered, a turning point that marked the final shedding of the woman who had once been silent and the emergence of the woman who could no longer be ignored. As Luna stepped fully into the ballroom, the soft murmurs of recognition and astonishment swirling around her, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the room, Constance. And in that instant, the world seemed to pause, her pulse quickened, and she understood that the moment of reckoning had arrived, the storm she had been building toward now at its peak, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the ballroom doors swung open, a hush swept across the glittering space as Luna stepped through, the golden chandeliers casting a warm glow over her radiant brown skin, the shimmer of her silver gown catching the light with each graceful step, her presence commanding attention without a word, an aura of quiet strength surrounding her like an invisible crown, and all eyes instinctively lifted to take in the breathtaking figure before them, the air thick with a mixture of admiration, astonishment, and barely concealed envy. Mr. Hazelwood, tall and impeccably poised beside her, rested a steadying hand lightly on her back, a subtle gesture of protection and solidarity that reinforced the sense of power she now exuded. The combination of his quiet authority and her luminous confidence making them appear as a force to be reckoned with, the room instinctively recognizing the shift in dynamics as their eyes followed her every movement. Constance froze mid-step, the wineglass in his hand trembling slightly, as though the icy liquid reflected the storm churning in his chest, disbelief painting his features, his mouth opening and closing silently as he tried to comprehend the transformation, the elegance, the aura of command emanating from the woman he had once dismissed so casually. And in that instant, the carefully constructed world of pride and arrogance he had inhabited began to crumble. His mother, equally stunned, gasped so loudly that it echoed through the expansive room, silverware clattering momentarily against the polished surfaces as though the mansion itself was registering the shock. Her eyes widening as she struggled to reconcile the woman standing before her with the timid, submissive figure she had believed she knew, and a wave of whispers erupted around the room, spreading like wildfire as guests leaned toward each other, murmuring in disbelief, the words carrying a mixture of awe and scandal. "Isn't that his wife? With the CEO? I didn't know she could command attention like that." The murmurs swirled, a gentle storm, as Luna's gaze remained calm, serene, and utterly composed. The poise she exuded a quiet flame that radiated confidence and inner strength. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile that needed no revenge to validate her presence. For her mere arrival was proof enough of her ascent, of the truth she had quietly been building toward for months. Hazelwood guided her toward the center of the room with an effortless grace, each step purposeful, the protective pressure of his hand a silent anchor, and as they reached the podium, he introduced her in a voice that resonated through the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, the heart of this company's transformation, Luna Constance." The declaration hung in the air like a statement of triumph, and for the first time the crowd saw not just a woman of beauty, but a woman of intellect, influence, and undeniable presence, a living testament to vision, perseverance, and quiet power. Constance's face turned ashen, pale as if the life had drained from him in a single, shocking moment, his mind racing to process the reality that the woman he had humiliated, the woman he had tried to erase from his own life, now stood above him in influence, recognition, and admiration, her eyes calm and unwavering as they met his across the room, silently narrating a story of resilience he could never undo. Guests' gazes flitted between the two of them, whispers continuing, some daring to speculate about their history, some marveling at the subtle tension radiating in the room, and Luna felt a quiet thrill, a surge of satisfaction tempered with elegance, knowing that her presence alone had shifted the room's energy, that she now commanded attention not with arrogance, but with the simple, undeniable truth of who she had become. Her heart raced with anticipation as she watched Consta struggle to regain composure, his jaw tight, his hands clenching and unclenching, the hum of whispered conversation like static in the air around him, and she realized in that moment that years of silence, restraint, and endurance had culminated in a presence that could no longer be ignored. A truth that was hers to wield as gracefully or as sharply as she chose. Hazelwood, sensing the tension thickening, leaned slightly closer to her, his voice a gentle murmur only she could hear. "Remember, Luna, strength is silent until it must roar. Let your calm speak louder than any words he could shout." Luna nodded imperceptibly, her chest rising with steady breath, eyes glimmering with determination, the thrill of confrontation mingling with exhilaration, knowing that every guest watching was seeing her not as a shadowed wife, but as a force reborn, admired, and entirely uncontainable. The chandelier light danced across her gown as she lifted her head slightly, scanning the room, the crowd's reaction a mixture of awe and curiosity, the subtle hum of cameras and flashes punctuating the stillness. And she felt the surge of power that came from being fully recognized, fully seen, fully celebrated for the brilliance she had nurtured quietly, without seeking validation from those who had once sought to diminish her. Constance's mother, realizing too late that her assumptions had been shattered, took a hesitant step forward, her voice a trembling mixture of shock and guilt. "Luna, But her words faltered under the weight of reality, and Luna's eyes met hers briefly, calm yet resolute, a gentle but unmistakable assertion that the past's control had ended and that no amount of pleading could reclaim what had been intentionally overlooked, dismissed, or suppressed. Luna allowed herself a soft, deliberate smile as she walked further into the center, the gentle sway of her gown echoing a rhythm of power, elegance, and confidence, each step purposeful, each movement a quiet declaration that she had arrived not for vengeance, not for confrontation, but for truth, visibility, and the rightful place she had long deserved. The energy in the room shifted subtly, the attention of guests now fully on her, the murmurs spreading further, speculation turning into admiration, and Luna's chest rose and fell steadily as she prepared to speak, to embody the transformation she had undergone, the years of quiet struggle and triumph converging into this moment of undeniable presence. Hazelwood's hand on her back offered not only reassurance, but a silent signal that they were a team, aligned in strategy and presence, and the gentle warmth of his presence reminded her that while this was her moment, it was also a shared acknowledgement of trust, respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of something more, the electric undercurrent of connection that had grown between them over months of subtle yet significant encounters. And then, the moment of direct confrontation arrived, the culmination of tension, anticipation, and the quiet satisfaction of long-suppressed triumph, as Luna's gaze fixed unwaveringly on Constance, her brown eyes calm, steady, and sparkling with an elegance that disarmed him completely, and in that singular, powerful instance she spoke, her voice soft yet carrying through the charged air, sweet yet firm. "You told me not to come, remember?" The words, simple yet devastating in their delivery, landed with quiet precision, an echo of years of endurance and reclamation, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath, watching the collision of past arrogance and present truth unfold in real time. Constance's hand twitched, his face drained of color, the weight of humiliation, disbelief, and unspoken regret pressing down on him as the crowd's murmurs swelled, and Luna, calm and poised, realized that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably, that tonight would mark the beginning of the reckoning he had never anticipated, and that every eye in the room now bore witness to her rise, her strength, and the quiet but undeniable triumph of a woman no longer defined by anyone but herself. 7. The room was still humming from the shock of Luna's entrance, the swirl of admiration, envy, and disbelief echoing through the ballroom. But as Hazelwood stepped forward with deliberate confidence, the attention shifted, the atmosphere tightening with a mixture of anticipation and awe, and every gaze fixed on the tall, poised CEO as he spoke with a voice calm, measured, yet carrying the weight of authority and reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we recognize someone whose brilliance, dedication, and unwavering vision have transformed not only our company, but the lives of countless people across this city, Luna Constance." The words fell like a gentle but unyielding hammer, each syllable cutting through the lingering echoes of past whispers and judgment, and the audience's reactions swelled into a crescendo of applause, flashes of cameras illuminating Luna like a beacon, her silver gown shimmering under the lights as the truth of her achievements radiated outward, undeniable, untouchable. Luna's breath caught for a moment. Not from surprise, but from the thrill of vindication, the quiet satisfaction of having endured every slight, every dismissal, every subtle humiliation, and risen above it all to claim a place that had always belonged to her. Her chin lifted with measured grace, her eyes calm, steady, luminous, with the strength she had painstakingly nurtured over months of perseverance and quiet rebellion. Across the room, Constance's colleagues, previously accustomed to his boasting and apparent control, turned their eyes toward him, confusion and pity mingling in their expressions, their silent judgment reflecting back the shattering of his pride in real time, and he felt it, the weight of exposure, the gnawing realization that the man he had tried to impress and align himself with, the CEO he had once claimed proximity to, now stood beside his wife as her mentor, her supporter, her protector, the very embodiment of all he had failed to secure in his own life. His mother, stunned into speechlessness, took a tentative step forward, her hand trembling as she reached toward Luna, whispering, "Luna, we didn't mean it, please." But the words fell flat, almost irrelevant, as Luna's calm, serene gaze cut through the air like crystal-clear glass, her silence more powerful than any retort she could have uttered, a quiet assertion that the past had no dominion over her present, that her dignity, her achievements, and her self-worth were hers alone, untouchable, radiant, and finally recognized. Hazelwood, sensing the emotional intensity of the moment, gently took Luna's hand, his thumb brushing tenderly over her skin, a subtle gesture that reminded her and the entire room that she was no longer isolated, no longer silent, no longer subject to the whims of those who had sought to diminish her, his presence a grounding, stabilizing, and affirming force. His eyes meeting hers with warmth, pride, and a spark of something unspoken, yet unmistakable, a connection that spoke louder than words, carrying both professional admiration and personal reverence. The cameras clicked incessantly, the flashes punctuating the air like fireflies suspended in a golden haze, capturing every detail, the subtle rise of her chest, the faint curve of her lips, the poised lift of her head, the delicate sweep of her gown, as though every pixel and frame were an acknowledgement of her transformation, her journey, and her emergence from the shadows of a past that had tried to confine her. Constance, paralyzed and pale, watched as the room shifted focus entirely to Luna. his own tears threatening to spill, a mix of regret, disbelief, and helplessness washing over him in waves, each wave carrying the undeniable truth that the woman he had buried under shame, mocked for her supposed inadequacies, had risen far higher than he could ever imagine, commanding respect, admiration, and influence that he could only look upon with a hollow ache of loss. Luna's lips curved into a faint, serene smile, her heart at peace, yet her spirit fierce, the culmination of years of silent endurance and quiet ambition shining through every gesture, every blink, every subtle movement as she absorbed the room's reaction, the power she now wielded in the space, the unspoken acknowledgement that her life was no longer dictated by fear, shame, or the opinions of those who had once sought to suppress her. Hazelwood stepped back slightly, allowing her the space to fully inhabit the moment, the crowd's applause growing louder, mingling with murmurs of astonishment, admiration, and curiosity, as the energy in the ballroom became electric, each guest feeling the magnetic pull of her presence, the undeniable aura of accomplishment and self-possession that radiated from her like a tangible force, impossible to ignore or dismiss. In that charged atmosphere, Constance's mother faltered further, stepping forward again, hands clasped nervously, voice wavering as she attempted to speak, to reconcile, to grasp at fragments of control, yet every syllable that tried to penetrate Luna's calm was deflected by the simple reality of her transformation. The serenity in her gaze and the quiet authority in her stance making every plea feel hollow, every attempt at apology too late, too weak to undo the years of disregard, neglect, and condescension she had endured. Luna allowed the room to feel the full weight of her presence, her stillness a statement, her gentle smile a testament to strength, her eyes reflecting both grace and the quiet satisfaction of triumph. And in that moment, every observer understood. She was no longer defined by the judgments, restrictions, or scorn of others. She had transcended them, and the sheer elegance with which she carried herself amplified the impact, creating an almost cinematic tableau of resilience, power, and undeniable truth. The murmurs intensified as Hazelwood guided her to the podium to accept the recognition she so rightfully earned, the weight of his hand on her back both comforting and empowering, signaling not only his support but also the undeniable acknowledgement of their shared understanding, their intertwined journeys, and the profound respect that had blossomed through months of mentorship, subtle encouragement, and quiet moments of connection. Every eye followed her as she raised her hand to accept the ceremonial plaque, every flash of the camera immortalizing the moment in time, every whisper of admiration amplifying the tension in the room as Constance's internal struggle became more visible, his pride dismantled, his control eroded, and his previous dismissals now hanging like chains he could not break free from. The applause swelled around her, echoing through the chandeliers and gilded walls, and Luna's chest filled with the satisfying mix of vindication and quiet joy, the exhilaration of being recognized for who she truly was, her intelligence, her grace, her leadership, all fully acknowledged before the eyes of those who had doubted her, belittled her, or ignored her potential. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing her every motion, and she felt the subtle thrill of awareness that she was, in that instant, untouchable in her dignity, untouchable in her authority, untouchable in her truth, and yet every movement was measured, elegant, soft, never harsh, never vengeful, only poised, only precise, only hers. Constance, his composure crumbling, felt his world shift irreversibly, every whispered "Luna" behind him. In the crowd, a reminder of the reversal of fortune, every glance toward the CEO by his side, a confirmation that she had transcended the boundaries he had sought to impose, and he realized that his tears, mixed with disbelief and shame, were nothing compared to the brilliance, confidence, and recognition she now commanded, a brilliance he could never claim to overshadow. Luna's hand remained lightly in Hazelwood's as she absorbed the room, the applause, the admiration, the tension and the soft weight of unspoken power settling comfortably in her chest, a mixture of calm, thrill, and quiet satisfaction filling her senses. And then, as if orchestrated by destiny itself, she reached into her bag, her fingers brushing over the sleek surface of an envelope she had prepared, the anticipation of the final revelation tightening in her chest, her lips curving into a serene, almost imperceptible smile. And she lifted the envelope slowly, deliberately, ensuring that all eyes, including Constance's, were upon her. The room's murmurs shifted to a tense hush as everyone sensed the weight of what she held, the unspoken promise of a final, undeniable statement about her autonomy, her power, and her refusal to be undermined ever again. And in a voice calm, measured, and filled with serene authority, she spoke, her words soft, yet echoing with unstoppable conviction. "Oh, there's one more thing I brought tonight." The statement hung in the air like a slow, electric charge, hearts skipping beats, whispers frozen mid-breath, cameras capturing every second, and Constance's face paled further, the realization dawning that whatever was coming next would seal the truth, the reckoning, and the finality of the woman he had once tried to control. The envelope lay in Luna's hand, the eyes of the crowd locked on her, Constance frozen in disbelief, and every heart in the room held its breath, waiting for the revelation that would change the night and perhaps everything after it, forever. 8. The hush that had fallen over the ballroom lingered like a heavy, anticipatory breath as Luna's fingers lingered over the sleek envelope she had prepared with meticulous care, the silver shimmer of her gown catching the light from the chandeliers as though the universe itself had paused to witness the final act of her quiet, long-fought reclamation. She lifted it slowly, deliberately, allowing the room to absorb the tension that radiated from her, each heartbeat echoing in the grand space as eyes followed her every movement, whispers growing softer as the crowd realized that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. Forever. Constance's hands, still trembling from the humiliation and awe of the previous moments, hovered uselessly in the air, unable to interfere, unable to alter the reality that had begun to solidify around him, and he felt a hollow, gnawing dread, a slow and inexorable sinking in his chest as he recognized that this was a turning point he had neither foreseen nor could he control. Hazelwood's steady presence beside Luna offered both reassurance and silent strength, his fingers brushing lightly against her shoulder, a subtle anchor in the storm of expectation and emotion, and his gaze met hers briefly, conveying admiration, pride, and an unspoken acknowledgement that this moment, this revelation, was hers to command. Luna cleared her throat softly, the sound carrying a calm authority that drew every ear toward her, and she laid the envelope carefully on the glittering table between her and Constance, the subtle weight of her finality evident in the deliberate grace of the movement, the crisp rustle of paper resonating in the sudden silence, and every guest in the room instinctively leaned closer, sensing that what was to come would leave no doubt about the woman standing before them. Her voice, soft yet ringing with unwavering firmness, finally broke the silence. "Merry Christmas, Constance." The words, simple in their delivery but monumental in their meaning, landed with the gravity of a final judgment, reverberating through the air as the crowd held its breath, recognizing the quiet strength behind the softness, the years of endurance condensed into a single, decisive moment that could neither be undone nor ignored. Gasps swept through the room like a wave crashing against walls of polished marble, the collective shock of witnessing such a precise and bold declaration of independence rippling through guests, colleagues, and family alike, their faces frozen in a mixture of awe, disbelief and reluctant admiration as Luna's calm composure contrasted so sharply with the chaos unraveling around Constance, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he was witnessing, felt his knees buckle as the envelope's significance finally registered in his mind, tears welling in his eyes, trembling uncontrollably as he realized that the life he had assumed control over, the woman he had dismissed, humiliated, and tried to suppress, had quietly orchestrated a moment that would forever sever the chains of his influence over her. His mother, horrified and desperate, stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached toward Luna, voice breaking into pleading, fragmented words. "Please, Luna, forgive us. We didn't mean it." But the weight of truth, dignity, and rightful authority in Luna's presence rendered her entreaties ineffective, powerless, and far too late. The calm serenity in Luna's gaze, cutting deeper than any words could hope to mend, every syllable of apology bouncing harmlessly against the unyielding walls of years of quiet resolve. Hazelwood, aware of the intensity of the moment and its cinematic perfection, allowed himself a small, steadying smile, placing his hand lightly on Luna's back in a gesture that communicated pride, protection, and unwavering solidarity, a physical acknowledgement that she was no longer alone, that she had never truly been alone, and that together they had crafted a truth that no falsehood, denial, or arrogance could undo. Luna's eyes glistened with the faint shimmer of tears, not born of sorrow, but of cathartic release, a soft sparkle reflecting the lights of the chandeliers. And she spoke again, her voice imbued with calm conviction and quiet triumph. "You told me not to come, but I came, with your CEO and with my freedom." The words echoed with the combined resonance of victory, liberation, and unbreakable self-respect, the cadence perfectly measured to convey both finality and elegance, a poetic closure to years of oppression and marginalization. And the audience responded instinctively, a mixture of awe, applause, and hushed murmurs swirling through the air like a living, breathing entity. Constance's body sank to the floor, knees touching the polished marble as tears cascaded freely down his face, each one a testament to the magnitude of loss, the awareness of humiliation, and the painful recognition of all the moments he had taken for granted, all the power he had abused, and all the pride he had clutched in vain, now crumbling irreversibly before the woman who had quietly, decisively, and elegantly reclaimed her life. Luna's heart remained serene, steady, and resolute as she watched him, the calm of her own presence amplifying the impact of the moment. Each graceful step she took backward, symbolizing the emotional distance she had restored between herself and a past that had tried to define her, control her, and diminish her light. Hazelwood, sensing the perfect closure of this chapter, whispered softly in her ear, "It's done. Every part of this moment is yours." And she allowed herself the smallest nod, a breath of relief, a release of years of tension, and a quiet acknowledgement that her power, dignity, and voice were wholly her own, unshared and unassailable. Snow had begun to fall outside, drifting softly against the grand windows of the mansion, delicate and pure, like a symbolic cleansing of the past, a gentle affirmation of new beginnings, and every flake seemed to reflect the brilliance of the silver gown, the sparkle of her eyes, and the steady warmth of Hazelwood's hand, a perfect mirror to the peace she now carried within herself. Luna lifted her chin slightly, the breeze of the opening doors brushing against her hair as she turned toward Hazelwood, eyes locking with his in a moment suspended in time, a silent conversation passing between them. Admiration, understanding, respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of the intimacy that had quietly flourished alongside mutual admiration over months of collaboration and trust. The murmurs of the crowd softened into whispers of awe, each guest sensing the completeness of the scene. The finality, the empowerment, the undeniable elegance with which Luna had orchestrated the evening, every movement and word choreographed in subtle perfection, the room itself seemingly bending to her presence as cameras captured every nuance, immortalizing the moment forever in digital memory, a testimony to resilience, brilliance, and reclamation. Luna allowed herself a small, contented smile as she stepped back, her gown trailing gracefully across the marble, a wave of liberation flowing through her, every movement, every gesture precise, deliberate, and breathtakingly composed, while Constance remained kneeling, helpless, a living testament to the reversal of control, the silent acknowledgement of his failure, and the unshakable reality of her triumph. Hazelwood opened the door for her, a gentle hand guiding her toward the glittering winter night, the snow falling heavier now, soft and immaculate, each flake a reflection of the fresh start that awaited, and Luna stepped into it with grace, her silver gown brushing the icy pavement, the cold against her skin, a thrill, a reminder of freedom reclaimed, and a life no longer bound by fear, shame, or manipulation. The limo waited nearby, engine quietly purring, its sleek black surface reflecting the soft luminescence of the streetlights, the snow dancing across its hood like stars fallen to earth, and Hazelwood opened the door for her, an unspoken promise of partnership, trust, and a future waiting to be claimed. Luna slid inside gracefully, the warmth of the car a stark contrast to the icy liberation outside, and Hazelwood followed, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to seal the past away, leaving only possibility, freedom, and the thrill of new beginnings lingering in the air. As the limo began to glide through the quiet streets blanketed in snow, Hazelwood leaned slightly toward her, voice low, calm, and filled with certainty. "Ready for our future?" Luna's lips curved into a serene, confident smile, her eyes reflecting a mixture of joy, relief, and unshakable determination. The sound of snow crunching beneath the tires, a gentle soundtrack to her rebirth, and she whispered, steady and unwavering, "Always." The city lights passed by, a blur of color and warmth, mirroring the glittering chandeliers of the ballroom, but now infused with the promise of freedom, love, and a life fully chosen, fully lived, and wholly hers. The final echoes of the evening's drama, the whispered apologies, the stunned glances of former peers, and the palpable shift in power dynamics faded into the night as Luna rested against Hazelwood, a quiet laugh escaping her lips, soft, liberated, and pure, her hand slipping into his as the limousine carried them away from the past toward a horizon filled with endless possibilities, love, and unbroken hope, leaving behind only the memory of a night where courage, dignity, and quiet strength had rewritten her story forever. And that's how Luna turned pain into power, proving that sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge. The same people who told her she'd embarrass them now live every day haunted by her success. She didn't come back for revenge. She came back for respect, her glow, her confidence, her freedom. That was her real victory. Because when a woman finally remembers her worth, the world has no choice but to notice. So if Luna's story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. And remember, no matter who doubts you today, one day they'll have to watch you rise.